Hello po. Good afternoon. For those who just came in, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Tats. I'm an intern at the SALT Institute. So welcome to day 3 of ADL LX 2021. This is the third session in this room number 7. And for this session, we have Ma'am Serena Vaswani, who teaches Introduction to Communication and Communication Theory at the Ateneo de Manila University, and she'll be telling us all about collaborative course design. So, Ma'am Serena, the floor is yours na po.
Okay. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking time to participate in this sharing session with me. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to the SALT Institute for a wonderful 3 weeks of meaningful learning conversations. Today, I hope to have a fruitful discussion with all of you on the potential ways by which we might consider collaborating with students on course design. So I'd like to start with an overview of what I will be discussing in my presentation, a story arc, if you will. I'll begin with an explanation of my context and the circumstances surrounding the learning experience that I'll be sharing about, which felt to me like diving off the deep end. From here, I'll also dive into the specifics of the practice that I conducted with my students and how this unfolded. Of course, any diving excursion must eventually be followed by a necessary surfacing for air. So it is at this juncture that I'll expound on how my students and I were able to adapt and settle into a rhythm for the remaining weeks of the quarter. I'll close my sharing with a reflection on my key learnings and takeaways that will hopefully help me catch the waves in succeeding class endeavors. So, my story takes place last year during the first semester of school year 2020 to 2021. So, my name is Serena Vaswani. I am an instructor with the Department of Communication, and I teach classes on communication theory, visual thinking for communication managers, and creativity and problem awareness. So, in the first semester of last school year, I taught 4 sections of communication theory in the first quarter. Now, prior to the online learning shift, I had already been incorporating certain technology supplements in my class design, particularly the use of Facebook groups for updates and blogging assignments, and also using Schoology and then later on Moodle as an online complement to my classroom discussions and an alternative venue for soft copy submissions. Post-pandemic and the shift to fully online learning, I moved to Canvas. And armed with the insights from the ADL training, I focused on designing an online learning experience for my Intro to Communication Theory class. So that is going to be the sort of subject context for the practice that I'll be talking about today. My biggest challenge, or the biggest challenge that I faced in sort of translating this into an online course, was in terms of streamlining my content and assessments. In a face-to-face classroom setup, we would be tackling 33 communication theories for the full semester. But now I was faced with the task of teaching this coverage in the span of 2 months, which is the rough equivalent of 1 quarter. So I set about my preparations to adapt my face-to-face syllabus to online learning delivery. I worked with my co-instructor to scale down the course to 23 theories spread across 6 modules. Each module was a thematic cluster of communication theories with an estimated learning span of 1 week per module. And the last week of the quarter was reserved for students to concentrate on the submission of the final summative assessment for the course, which was supposed to be a critical essay making a specific argument regarding a communication phenomenon through the lens of a chosen theory. So I designed the course to have asynchronous formative discussion boards for each theory. And in each discussion board, there was the reading assignment, some multimedia resources for theory applications, and sort of my narrative weaving through them, summary outline of key points, and a closing set of think and share prompts for the class to engage with. And these asynchronous discussion boards for each theory were meant to be no pressure, non-graded spaces. Each discussion was set up as a discussion board because I felt this would also allow my students to ask questions and clarify points of confusion with the material they had just engaged with. And I also decided on weekly synchronous sessions to check in with the class on their progress and discuss questions about the week's module coverage. And these were all non-graded as well. My graded assessments included 6 summative reading quizzes, one at the end of each module, 8 discussion forums, half were to be accomplished individually and the other half to be accomplished with their study groups, and 4 individual application logs and the final individual essay. I gave my students suggested deadlines and cutoff deadlines to help them pace their own independent studying with their own varying contexts. Now, if at this point you're looking at the screen and you're thinking to yourself, that sounds like a lot of work, then you would be correct. So that's kind of why it felt like diving off the deep end, because in my mind, when I first designed this, it seemed doable, but the student reality was really a very different experience. As we approached mid-quarter, I noticed that some of my students seemed to be struggling more than others. While I extended individual concessions for submissions, this increasing trend of such instances was concerning to me. One of the beadles of my 4 sections reached out to me to let me know that pressure had been piling up from requirements across their classes for the quarter. So while you might say that I felt like I was diving off the deep end with my course design, I was, trying out a new way to teach a subject. It dawned on me that my students were also diving off the deep end in their own way as they struggled to cope with academic obligations from all their classes online, not to mention their extracurricular activities and personal commitments as well. So there's a great quote from an article in Cult of Pedagogy that states one of the fastest ways to understand how your students feel in a class is to ask them. So I reached out to all my beetles to ask if they would be open to meeting to talk about how we might adjust our way forward for the subject. And I called this a touch base, a com theory touch base, because the image that I had was one where we sort of paused, got in touch with each other virtually, and redefined the baseline so that we could be on the same page going forward with the class. I decided to have the Zoom meeting with all 4 beetles together since I thought that the changes requested by one section could be relevant to other sections as well. And so I sent them all a joint email to request their participation in the call so we could discuss how the course structure, pacing, and content might be adjusted to create a healthier and more meaningful learning environment for them. And I made sure to state that attendance was open not just to the beetles, but all members of the class if they were available and inclined to participate. So before we had the Zoom session, I requested my beetles to do some prep work beforehand, which is to ask their classmates for some constructive and concrete feedback on the course design. The specific questions that I asked them to liaise with their classmates about were, number 1, how do you feel about our current pacing? Looking at the schedule plotted in the syllabus course outline, do you see yourself being able to keep up with cutoff deadlines for the summative assessments? Do you have concrete suggestions for how we might adjust the ways of working to meet your learning needs, which includes your general well-being, bearing in mind that the quarter will also be ending by October 31. And this touch base occurred at the start of October. And so I mentioned to them that suggestions could include, but did not have to be limited to course content, course deadlines, course format, synchronous session format, and or frequency and such. So when we met, I started by just listening to them share. And I learned a few things. Well, number 1, they were struggling to keep on track with the daily pacing of our course topics and the graded discussion forums. Some of them were feeling like they would be left behind or miss too much content if they skip one day to rest or take a breather. And it was apparent from their sharing that the quarter system posed a challenge to the process of incubation, which is vital to any meaningful engagement with a subject, particularly one that is focused on theories. I'd like to share some specific things that they expressed and proposed to me regarding the course design, but I have paraphrased the wording for the purpose of this presentation. So one of the things that they started off with was about how they were engaging with the content. So they mentioned that they understand the theories better when I talk about them in our synchronous sessions. And so they were like, do you think it's possible to prepare recorded lectures so we can use the synchronous session for Q&A? And the background around this was that I did not think it necessary when I first designed the course to make pre-recorded lectures for each theory, because I had sort of done narratives in the discussion board as a way to sort of be a guide for their reading assignments and looking at applications of the theories. But then when we would meet for our sync sessions, it would turn out like, could we go into this theory in more detail? Maybe we could have a discussion about it, and it would end up actually becoming a lecture discussion. So that's one of the things that they suggested. They also mentioned that the class is 1 week behind on suggested pacing for modules. So could we extend cutoff deadlines? When we read theory chapters, we do it more than once to let the concept sink in. And so this one was a little bit jarring for me. They asked me, can you make the last module optional, right? And they mentioned, though, that they like the pacing of the suggested deadlines. They appreciated the grace period of the cutoff deadlines, but they still felt pressured to meet the suggested deadlines, which is quite enlightening for me because in my mind, I was thinking, oh, okay, so this lessens the pressure by giving them suggested and cutoff deadlines. But for them, it was like, I have this sort of internal pressure to meet the suggested deadline because I don't want to fall behind. So there was sort of that, difference in the way that we interpreted the design and the setup of the course. Is there a way to lessen the workload? And would you consider allowing us to do our final essay in pairs or trios coming from our study groups? So I should note that it took a while to get to this point of sharing and feedback, because there was a hesitancy on their end to make suggestions or express difficulty when we first started the session. There was sort of like a hesitancy to be frank about the experiences. But once they got going and they heard each other voicing out similar concerns, the comfort level with sharing seemed to increase. And I think that it also helped that I was making a conscious effort to not jump in and defend the design aspects that they were raising concerns about. And so again, I'm reminded of another quote from Cult of Pedagogy, which states that when students feel heard and seen, that makes school a place that they want to come to. And at the end of the day, I want my students to want to learn the subject and feel like they are learning rather than simply clicking through modules and submitting requirements. And I realized during this session with them how powerful the act of listening could be. So, how did we surface for air as a class? Coming from their specific questions about how we might adjust the course design and their suggestions, we agreed on ways that would maintain the integrity of their learning outcomes for the subject and give them some breathing space in engaging with the rest of the course coverage and assessments. So I was honest in telling them my own apprehensions from designing the course and explaining why we couldn't simply make the last module optional, as it was integral to the learning competences that would help them in their major area of study. And I think that is a discussion that I think is sometimes I assume it's implicit that students understand the alignment between their learning outcomes, the learning competences, and the course coverage, because it's sort of laid out in the syllabus. But when you actually have a discussion and explain like how that manifests in real world situations with them, it then makes it more apparent for them why can't we just let go of this content, why we need to sort of be able to touch on all of these themes and topics for the quarter. And then that sort of gets them to think about, okay, well, how can we then work around this? Because now we realize the relevance in terms of our learning outcomes. We reviewed the course calendar together. We did like a joint editing session on Google Docs during the meeting to adjust for pacing difficulties experienced by students and also the deadlines from their other subjects, so that we wouldn't have clashing deadlines. And we also formalized some of their suggested design adjustments. Specifically, I decided that I would record lecture videos for module 5 and 6, since this seemed to be something that they said would be very helpful for their processing of the content. We scaled down workload to help them drop their to help them with sort of going through the modules. And the way we did this was to agree on a scheme wherein they would get to drop their lowest discussion forum post and their lowest reading quiz. So in the event that they were not able to sort of do the quiz, they could easily drop that. And so only the highest minus one output would be counted towards their grades, since that was a particular concern that they had. And then we also had more reminders for cutoff deadlines. And the final point, which actually is something I didn't even think of, but when they brought it up, it was a good discussion that we had, was around working in trios and pairs for their final essay. And so ultimately, we did proceed with going with this option after gaining consent from all sections. But I also would note that the discussion that we had around this decision included sort of a working out that when you work individually and you work with trios or pairs, the the working dynamic and sort of like being able to sort of assert your voice in that requirement is something that they should be comfortable doing. So those were all things that sort of factored into our discussion during this session. So this brings me to my takeaways that will hopefully help in catching future waves that come rushing through learning designs in the future. Uh, and so I'm going to share my final quote from my sharing session from Susan Blum, and she argues that we need to grapple with issues of control, whether decisions are made for students or with them. And this experience taught me the value of taking a dialogic approach when discussing course concerns with students. It creates an open space for all participants to give voice to their experiences. And I personally believe that decision making should involve all relevant stakeholders. Students are key stakeholders in the process and experience of their education. It's also taught me the following things. As much as I like to plan ahead and try to have contingency plans for every eventuality, I need to be flexible in adapting to student needs during the actual online run of the course. The intentions behind my course design may not align with the experience of my students, so talking through the course design helps clarify intentions and expectations. And when you give students a chance to participate in designing their learning experiences, it teaches them to be critical of how they are learning versus focusing on the grade. So finally, the experience has given me some questions to think about in designing succeeding courses in both online and face-to-face learning environments. Number one is, what if I involve my students more actively from the start in co-constructing their learning experience for the subjects I teach? And number two is, what if students had a say in finalizing the course syllabus that will guide the rest of their semester or quarter, engaging with a particular subject? What might that look like in practice? So I'm closing my sharing with some questions because I am also still discovering answers to them as I engage with my students and endeavor to improve my teaching practice as a constant work in progress. Thank you very much, and I look forward to an enlightening open forum ahead with all of you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Serena. So, for the next part, I'll read out some questions in the chat box for you. Okay, so first question, given the adjustments in the course design, do you have to make revisions in your syllabus mid-quarter? Follow-up question, do you have to get the consensus of the entire class before the changes were implemented?
Yes, I did. I did have to sort of ensure that there was a consensus among all the members of the class before changes were implemented. So to the first point, part of that question, given the adjustments in the course design, do you have to make revisions in your syllabus? Um, because these adjustments were not a complete removal of particular requirements or assessments, and instead it was sort of how can we make this requirement easier for you to accomplish given your various contexts. It didn't necessarily mean it didn't necessitate redoing of the syllabus. So in a way, because it was happening mid-quarter, it wasn't really something that we revamped the entire syllabus. That is something that I think about, though, is that what happens in cases wherein the changes are so broad that it really does necessitate removing requirements or changing topics. But we did not change course coverage. Instead, we sort of found ways to lighten the load of the existing requirements, by creating those schemes of like drop your lowest output in this particular assessment, for example. But in terms of getting the consensus, that's definitely something that I was very particular about. And this is also where a close working relationship with my beadles comes in. And I have to say that I'm very grateful that my beadles were so sort of proactive in reaching out to me, and also coming like coming to sort of represent their classmates. So what would happen is that they would run Google Form surveys with their classmates, so that we would get the consensus before we proceeded. And for example, just to speak on this a little bit more, I had to get consensus from the class before we shifted to a pair or trio final essay for the class, because I wanted to make sure that they were okay with working in trios or pairs. Some students are more comfortable working individually for a final assessment. And sort of in order to work around that, we also had the option to work individually. So trying to be more flexible with what is the learning and doing context that works best for you. And I did have some students who opted to work individually, which was fine. And so there was a lot of back and forth, like reaching out to a student who didn't declare a group and asking, are you working individually? Are you working with a team? And then sort of like confirming that with them.
If anyone else has a question, feel free to leave it in the chat box po. Or pwede rin pong mag-raise po kayo ng hand and then you can ask your question yourself. Okay, there's one comment here that says we were not taught instructional design. That is why I'm having a hard time. Perhaps you can give tips, Ma'am Serena, or more practical tips.
So actually, the only training that I came into for my online classes was the ADL. And so like as much as possible, I tried to adhere to the principles that were taught in terms of the balance of asynchronous and synchronous, and then sort of also looking at the chunking of the course into modules that could be standalone but also sort of have a cohesive whole. I think one of the things though that was not like that kind of came at me as a surprise, and it shouldn't have, because honestly it's in the name, it's adaptive learning design, right? But it was really that adaptability in the design that I already had that I kind of had to wrestle with. Because when you start out with a course syllabus, you want it to sort of be seen through and not really have many issues with how you're going to manage the class. Sort of just make it be a smooth run. But for me, it was really eye-opening to realize that I can actually adapt if there are individual contexts. So I don't also have formal background in instructional design, so we are in the same boat. And I think it's really more taking aside that formality. It's also, for me, it's also about just understanding for my students, how do you learn? Like, okay, I imagine that you sit at a table and open a chapter and read through it and then go through my discussion board and answer stuff. That's not really how some of them study. Some of them study in different ways. Some of them read it 3 times before they actually engage with their classmates. Some of them actually had conversations with their study groups before participating in the discussion boards, the formative ones. So that's actually like just having conversations with them to understand, oh, that's how you study it. So maybe then I can also adjust the way that I expect you to perform in my course, or the kinds of how I expect you to work on the assessments for my course.
Okay po, thank you for the answer. There's another question po. Have you ever tried planning the course with the students at the start of the semester? Any
No.
initial ideas for the sem?
Okay. No, I have never tried readjusting the course with the students at the start, and that is actually something that I would like to try. Because this experience happened during the first semester of the last school year, so that was September, October. Since then, I've taught classes in the second sem and the succeeding quarters, and And I have tried to sort of write at the start of the quarter, ask them, are there things here that you would want to adjust or change? But I have not actually tried sort of like picking apart the syllabus with them at the start. It's actually one of the things that is related to the questions I left off with at the end of my presentation, which is I wonder what that might look like. And if I were to try that out, I wonder how that might proceed. I think it would definitely be a learning experience to try it out. One of the things though I notice is that it helps students to sort of also sit with the syllabus for a while. Because in the beginning, when I ask them, do you have adjustments? Do you have questions? Are there things you'd like to change? There aren't many that come up with, yes, can we do this? Yes, can we do that? And I think it's because it's only through experiencing the design of the course that they start to think, what if we did it this way? Or what if we did it that way? So then it sort of like becomes a challenge to me to try and be a bit more flexible in adjusting to those comments or that feedback from the students.
Any questions pa po? We still have 4 minutes. Oh, there's a comment here in pala which reaffirms the statement about gathering insights before the course. It says, I believe it's good practice to get students' expectations at the start about the course and what they want to learn most about the topics.
Yeah, I agree. Also in like because thank you very much for the comment, and I do agree, like particularly in terms of content, what types of examples, I completely agree that. And sometimes it's just that there are examples that come up while you're teaching the course due to current events that are just perfect for discussion with the class. And students bring it up in discussion forum. And so you're like, yeah, let's talk about this and let's bring it in. So
Okay, meron raise ng hand. You can unmute po and ask your question.
Yeah, I just want to share because I also did ask my students what their expectations are from my class. It's just that I'm teaching nursing and we have loads of subject matter and we talk about life and health in general. Now my problem then is we were not taught, as I mentioned, we're not taught about instructional design because we have to recalibrate supposedly the syllabus into an online platform. It's just that we always face the impasse of how to teach because we don't go to the hospitals. That is one of the side of nursing where we teach demonstration of procedures, and then at the same time we have a very lengthy kilometric topic to discuss because we only meet once a week for maybe 3 to 4 hours. That's why the instruction then is, yeah, we cut between synchronous and asynchronous, but sometimes our students do not like asynchronous because the content itself is a bit complex. So I tried to give them ethics was easier, health ethics was easier, but in nursing subjects per se, it is both a science, it is both, a social topic. Everything is there. And when it comes to deeper science, my students would always hate it if they are asked to do independent work. Now, if we do synchronous, they also do not relish the fact that we have a bit lengthy of time to spend with them because we need to explain, like as you mentioned, we have to give them situations that are based in realistic occurrences, like what happened in the hospital, or how do we deal with the mental patients if we're facing them, or how do we deal with the community when we face the differences between a tribal and mere Bisaya or whatever communities. So sometimes you are caught in between students wanting independence and at the same time not wanting independence. But anyway, I am learning so much because it also affirms the idea that asking their expectation, even if they really don't know what expectations they have of a subject that is very new to them, because I'm teaching second year. Second year is the beginning meat of nursing. So they don't really have any idea how it is. But in the third year and the fourth year, yeah, but the third year do not also understand that third year is difficult. So we are caught in that quagmire of difficulty. But anyway, thanks for this. I have been here and it's my first time to speak. I just listened because I wanted to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can totally understand the frustration of like being caught in that like synchronous, asynchronous. I want to learn it this way. I want to learn it that way. I don't know how I want to learn it because I don't know the topic yet. Um, and so I think actually one of the things is that apart from understanding their expectations, one of the things that helped me is to just ask, is to keep asking them. So like I'll ask them at the start, but then every maybe after a week and a half or 2 weeks, I'll ask them, how are you doing? Any ideas, any things that any thoughts coming to your head about, I wish we could learn it this way, and then we can talk about maybe adjusting. So it's a constant checking in. I think is what is the only way that I've been able to try and adjust in that respect so far.
Funny is we do that every day in our duty. And yet,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is helpful to ask them. But at the same time, they tell us that, yes, ma'am, it's getting harder. But anyway, that is expected. Uh, I just hope and I just wish that we were taught more online teaching strategies. I guess that's my point also, because I could have different alternatives in the methods that I will be teaching, because I'm teaching the subject per lecture. I'm also teaching demo subject. I don't have alternatives though, but I'm trying. I've been reading. Yun lang yata yung kulang na mas nafe-feel ko na until now I'm wanting. Kasi even if I study, sometimes mahirap siyang i-apply. Not all are applicable. Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's true.
Okay, so it's 4:01. Sayang may mga questions pa. For Ma'am Serena, maybe if it's okay with you, you can leave your email in the chat box so people can contact you if ever they have questions that they want answered. Since di na natin
Right.
masasagot yung other questions.
No
So, ayun,
problem.
thank you so much, Ma'am Serena, and to everyone who listened in and participated. Thank you also for attending ADL LX 2021. And may I invite everyone po to attend the closing plenary. I'll leave the link in the chat box. Hope to see you guys there. So again, thank you,
Thank
Ma'am Serena, and thank you to everyone who attended. Have a great rest of the day.